That's all the tabletop now stained. And what I've also done is, in the odd little patch just here, there'd been some 2-pack filler going to various little spots here and there, mainly to fill the holes in the where the knots were. So what I've done is I've gone over the top of them with, it's just spirit stain, but it's really, really intense stain. Same, just a brown, just so that it takes away the starkness of the filler. So what I'm going to do now is just knock this back. This is really knackered old wire wool, fine as I've got, and I'm just going to wipe back the surface. I'm not pressing on very hard. It was just a little bit too even, the colour. So I'll go over it all once like this. Then on this edge here, this obviously you've got 2 drop leaves that come down here, but this end and that end will naturally get more wear, and also possibly along that edge if they're only just sort of using it as an occasional table. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to rub off some of the stain, not in any sort of even fashion. It's more a case of where you think it's going to get the most wear. Obviously the corners will, like that, and I don't go mad. I just do one wipe down that edge there. It should just leave a little bit of a lighter edge, and the same down here. It's all about what you can see and where you think it's going to get the most wear. Again, you won't be touching this ever again with anything other than wire wool. So that's about as far as I'm going to go with that. Because what you can do, when you put the French polish on, you can actually cut back the colour a little bit, even when the French polish is on the top. And I'll make that decision tomorrow after I've given it its first coat, because there is actually a little bit more staining to do tomorrow, believe it or not, because on the surface before I stripped it back there are actually some brown splash marks, and what the previous finisher did with it, all you do is you get your stain in your pot and you get a little bit on your brush and you just do that, and it like leaves little globules across it. And I've got a little bit of that to do. I can remember where they were. There's about 4 different splatters, so I've got that to do, but that will be done with the Van Dyke Brown. So what I've got here, I've got various pots of French polish, but this one is the one I want to use, but it's not in quite the right coloured French polish, so I'm going to swap lids. So now I've got brown French polish. I use old coffee jars. Charge the brush. Now on the first coat I only do the top, I don't do the edges. So I start on the far side, and you should start to see this surface come alive now. You've got to keep moving. Don't stop. And when you've got a big surface like this, what I do is go up one way and then I start coming down the next, overlapping. I'm trying not to get too much on this, and I don't want to leave any join lines, so if I have to go back I do, but it's all about just keeping the movement going and spreading out the French polish, because in warm environments you'll probably not get all the way across this top before the area that you started with is actually going off, and you'll feel it pulling. French polish tells you when you can't go any further with it, because you'll feel like the brush is actually starting to connect and stick to the top. Start your lay your brush on in from where you want to be, but then go back over it like that. Doesn't matter if you're not putting that much on, as long as you're sealing the surface in. See, that's drying there already. A bit thin there, so. Damn it. Try and make it so that your brush doesn't start over the edge, otherwise you'll start getting a run going down. So you might notice that I'm not just sort of plunging my brush straight onto the surface, I'm going onto the surface in a moving process. So flick off like that, off and back in. So exaggerated, you're going off and in, off and in. If you get any bits in it, don't worry about it. At this stage it doesn't matter, and because it's an oak top, generally speaking, you don't have a high finish. If you see some like Sheraton pieces of antique furniture, they've got a very, very high gloss finish. Well, you're going to probably be using white French polish with that and burnishing it with a cream to get the finish up. But you'll also be hand rubbering it rather than applying the French polish with a brush like this. But that is a different ball game of French polishing altogether from brushing on brown polish like this. And if it's going to go wrong with French polish, it'll go wrong with a job like that. The timings on it have got to be spot on all the time. But anyway, going back to this, just keep doing that. And I won't do any more of this afternoon. I will leave it until tomorrow. As I said, I won't be doing the edges, and I'll explain why tomorrow. There we go. Now I think that is about the right colour. I think it is anyway. But when it's all gone off, it'll look quite dull and uninteresting until tomorrow. But we'll probably have to give this about another, I would say, 3 to 4 coats. But you don't actually fill all of the pores of the oak. You'll see all these little silver flashes. Well, that's the open pores of the oak. You keep going until they're almost sealed in, but then you finish off with a wax. You never ever get a really, really high gloss finish on oak. You always rely on a wax finish. And the old phrase is, don't leave it treacly. If it's treacly, you've got too much polish on the top. Anyway, that's it till tomorrow. I've gone all the way around the outside of the table edge. Top's done, been all the way around the edge, and I've just got this to do now, where just one brushful is enough normally, and I use a very small brush for this, and that's why I wanted to do this last, because it's so very small compared to the other mop that we use, and they are called a mop. It's a small one that I use on the edges, and it saves the brush head from sweeping underneath and then actually coating the underside and the top again with another layer, which I don't want at this stage. So the next part of the restoration, or the refinishing I should say, is really fine wire wool, and I'm going to go over the whole surface. This is all dry, and all you're doing is you're taking any specks of dust off the top initially, and you can feel it. If you've got tiny little bits of dust in, you can feel it actually pulling on the wire wool. It'll just like snag it and then it'll disappear. And when you look across the tabletop into the light, you'll see that if there's anything left, and this is all looking okay to me. Now this will give an appearance of being darker for 2 reasons. One, because the stain is quite uniform all the way over, but also because I'm going over it and matting the surface. French polish is normally naturally glossy, but by doing this you're taking it back to a matte finish because you're cutting the surface of the French polish away. Now don't worry too much about this French polish dust. Sorry about that, that's the compressor just kicking in. Don't worry too much about this French polish dust going into anything that's slightly tacky on this front edge. It doesn't matter because it is only French polish dust, and when you put the next coat on it will just merge in again. Now if you remember me telling you about how you can start to age it, again you knock off these edges a bit so that you go in through the French polish and the stain a little bit. These darker lines and scratches that were sort of formed into the tabletop by the manufacturer are starting to come into view now, because as I'm wiping this wire wool over, you can see the dust from the French polish. As I'm wiping it over, it's glazing over the top of these, and these are still shiny, all these little scratches, and they need to be, because I don't want to take that stain out of those scratch marks. That's, let's call it, that's the aging that I want left in the table. Doesn't matter which way you go with your wire wool, because there are so many different directions of wire wool in there that it's only ever cutting and it won't leave any marks in the surface. But don't, for goodness sake, go with coarse wire wool. Right, that's what it's going to be left at now. Now there's a little bit of a dilemma here. When you restain anything, obviously you've got to try and get it back to the colour, because you've got two leaves on this occasion. We've got two leaves, one either side, and this needs to be something like the right colour. I know at the moment that this is ever so slightly dark, but what you've got to remember is that you've got to try and get back to about the right colour, but you've also got to remember that the UV from the sun is going to make it lighter. So over a period of 12 months, whatever colour you put on, in 12 months time it will be lighter. But the other problem that you've got is that French polish is either white, as they call it, white or clear, or you've got best button polish and brown polish, which are similar colours. So whatever you put on stain wise, you've got to think, now what colour is that French polish going to take it to? And as beginners, I would recommend that you do sample swatches, and in doing that you get the right material of oak, and then anything that you've taken off your tabletop that you're working with, as in muck wise, like you've got on this is crusted up with all of the old polish and everything that came off. You wipe that onto your new oak, then you wipe it off, then you put your stain on like you want to put on here, but you do 3 or 4 different colours of stain. Let's say Van Dyke brown, light oak, medium oak, dark oak. Try different types as well, cellulose, ethanol, or ethanol stains, or even just water-based stains. Mix up your own. I prefer to mix up my own because I can get over a lot of the problems where if I've got a piece of the portion of the table that is not taking the stain so well, I can do the rest of it, then come back and very, very lightly run another stain over the top where it's too light. Because what you've got to remember is a piece of wood is never just flat grain. If you look from the side of a piece of wood, grain is doing that all the time, and where it comes out like that, where you've got what we call short grain, that will really suck in the stain, and it will also suck in the polish a lot more until the end of the pores of the grain are sealed up. So this is all things that you've got to overcome and remember when you're restoring something. You are going to make loads and loads of mistakes, and believe me, I'm still making loads, but let's not talk about the negative, let's talk about the positive. The only way you're going to learn is by having a go. So next stage, talking of having a go, is wiping all the dust off this, putting another coat of French polish on it, and then when you see it next time, you'll see another colour from where we are now, ever so slightly browner and a lot richer, because we've sealed the grain now, next coat, and we'll see how we go from there. See you in a bit.